Let me tell you of a great deception that as humans we have fallen to. And it's a deception that all throughout the third world countries, especially, we have allowed society, different leadership to make us believe something that is absolutely not true. So I was taking care of a young lady here in El Salvador, and she just represents many who I saw. Her issue was stress. She was not sleeping, concerned. And you know, when you're stressed, you have issues that can be manifested physically, such as headache, abdominal pain, not sleeping. And so I asked her, what is it that she's concerned with? What is it that is stressing her out? Now, of course, I was in an area where it was, you'd say, country. You know, El Salvador is a country itself. But this would have been a country where when you look around, it was very green. Nothing was necessarily very manicured. The houses were made of zinc and wood. But as you look at the landscape, you realize how bountiful it was blessed as far as fruits were concerned. So I asked her, what is it that is stressing you? She said poverty. And again, that was the sentiment of many of the ones that I've seen, that I saw. I said, poverty? Explain yourself to me. She said that she was worried because she doesn't work like many of those around. And it's interesting that while they would consider themselves not working, all it means is that they were not getting money for what they were doing. However, they were taking care of kids, while the husband may have been out farming, for those who had husbands. But it was evident, of course, that someone sometime in the past had planted trees and the trees were producing bountifully. But she was stressed, she was poor. I asked her, what is the need of money? She said, well, you need money to buy things that you need. You need money for a house. And of course, when she was talking about a house, it's not that she was homeless. She was living in a house that was modest. It was consistent with all the others that lived in the area. She mentioned she needs it for clothing. She needs it for, other things. And of course, she was not naked. So she was thinking, of course, about, clothing, maybe with a name brand tag on there. But she was stressed, and it was manifested physically. I asked her, what about food? She said, that too. She needs money. But then I told her to look around and ask her, what does she see? Really didn't appear to her that there was anything spectacular, because she was so used to everything that she has around her. So it was essentially taken for granted. So I started to teach her. I said, the number one thing that we're in need of course, is food. If you had the last dollar and you could pay for rent or you could buy food, I said, what would you do? And she mentioned food. I asked her, have you ever seen anybody in this area die from hunger? Her answer was no. I said, then if you have what is needed, why would you say you are poor? And it's a mindset, of course, that, again, many of us share. Meaning that we consider ourselves poor, and that becomes our perspective, and we desire to have more, we desire to have money, and our understanding of the need for money, is somewhat distorted. Why? Because the person with the food is the one who should be considered wealthy. You had the example with Egypt during the time of Israelites. It was because of a famine that the Israelites ended up in Egypt. All the world had to come to Egypt to buy food because it was a worldwide famine. But that concept still was difficult to resonate. The other interesting thing is that as I went out today to buy some fruits, I just looked at it and says how interesting it is, meaning that here is a blessing. I was able to get some bananas. I paid $1 for that. I had some lychee. I mean, these things are like gold in the United States. I mean, I had more than a handful. They were like 15 for $1. I had these little things here. I'm not even sure what they're named or what it's called, but I do know that, when they do go on sale, you might get a handful and it will cost you more than $1. I mean, I was able to get a bag full, and I mean, if I wanted more, I could have bargained with them. I got guineps. Now I'm used to guineps from Jamaica. Bag full. Actually, this is smaller compared to the one that I had the other day. It was $1. And I got these things that reminded me of Nesberry, but they're bigger than Nesberry, as you can see. I got 3 of them for $1. That's 33 cents. I got 2 mangoes. Now, I didn't really need the mangoes because I do have mangoes at my yard. But just to patronize them, I bought 2. It was 2 for $1. Again, I didn't bargain because, again, I just appreciate the fact that they're out, trying to make something. Of course, this dragon-looking fruit, usually pretty expensive. The young lady who said she was poor, of course, these are the things that she has access to without paying. Life is very funny. We work all our lives to be able to reach a point where we don't have to work so we can relax and we have enough money, depend on where you live, to buy what we want. All these fruits. What if you lived in an area where you didn't have to be gainfully employed, but you have access to all this food? The only other set of people that I know that don't have to work and not even have to worry about what they eat are usually royalties, or people with some sort of dynasty or family who has money, or, they don't think about working. They don't have to. But look how interesting it is. You have people who are in very humble environment, who are in the same position where they don't have to work, but yet still the mind and the perspective is we are poor. Why? Because we don't have what others have. When you look at all the things around, you find that we desire things that really aren't essential for life. Such as, I have this shirt on. I don't think it has any brand on it. Didn't really cost much. However, if I was to put a tag on there or a brand on there, all of a sudden, the value goes up. The desire, based upon advertisement and everybody around, that desire causes that price to go up. Like a Louis Vuitton or a Tommy Hilfiger or, whatever it is. The reality, though, is the same natural resources. What it took to make this, and if I was to put a brand on there, would have been the same. Very interesting. You use a needle And depend on what you sow, what letters you sow, or what pattern you sow, it makes it that in the head you think you are rich. The message today is simply just understand that God said be content. Appreciate what you have. Don't let the external things cause you to be stressed. There are people who will say, I'm blessed because I can afford all these name brand things. But the reality is, it burns just the same as the thing that does not have the brand. God bless, be content, and remember that you are rich because you're a child of the God. And he says he has a cattle on 1,000 hills. God bless.